political affiliation. Democracy works when the people work, and the ultimate privilege and right in a democracy is for the people to exercise their constitutional right to vote.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
We are going to take you to the floor of the House of Representatives, where business is scheduled to get underway in just a moment. Of course, live coverage here on C-SPAN. The Senate also scheduled to be in session today in what is likely to be the last day before Congress returns after the November 6th elections. A quick reminder, this weekend on C-SPAN 2, our live coverage of the National Book Festival, the 12th year it's taken place on the Mall here in Washington. Saturday and Sunday, you can check out the complete schedule online at booktv.org and check out all of our scheduling information anytime at cspan.org. Thanks for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. God of all creation, we give you thanks for giving us another day. On this day, the People's House concludes its business. Members return to their congressional districts. An election to determine those who would serve this nation as members of Congress lies before us all. There are many energies which divide this House. There are many voices throughout our nation vying for the attention of any who would listen. Please bless our nation and those who leave this chamber for the oncoming and ongoing campaign. Grant that there be more light than heat, more charity than enmity, more graciousness than ugliness, more wisdom than ignorance. Our great nation has perdured over 2 centuries, with many fits and starts, but many triumphs as well. In the weeks that come, may your grace descend upon all citizens engaged in the affairs of our time. May we be mindful of needs beyond our own and united in a commitment to work together for a better future for these United States. Bless us this day and every day, and may all that is done be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
Thank you for the honor, Mr. Speaker. I invite those in the gallery to join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 one-minute requests on each side. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
To address the House for 1 minute, advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, as we enter the final stages of this election cycle, the American people have a choice for change, promoting limited government with expanded freedom or big government with power to politicians. A key issue is job creation. I support the bipartisan initiatives of John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan of cutting taxes, which enables the private sector to create jobs. President Obama has enacted failed policies of borrow, tax, and spend, producing 43 months of unemployment over 8%. New jobs could be created with an all-the-above energy policy, but President Obama promised skyrocketing energy costs, doubling gas prices. A better course would be to develop the Keystone Pipeline with our #1 ally, Canada. The contrast on national defense is clear. We should stand for peace through strength of Ronald Reagan. President Obama's policies to hollow out our military reveals weakness. My constituents are heartbroken at the internet tragedy of our ambassador to Libya being murdered and his body desecrated by terrorists. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, later today the House is scheduled to adjourn for 6 weeks with no plans to come back into session until November. On behalf of the hard-working Rhode Islanders I serve, I rise to express my deep disappointment that the House Republican leadership is choosing to adjourn and abandon the middle class when so much work is left to be done. In my home state, nearly 60,000 men and women cannot find work. More than 50,000 homes have mortgages that are underwater. But instead of working to pass a comprehensive jobs plan, provide relief to homeowners, or strengthening families by passing the middle-class tax cuts, House Republicans want to take the next 6 weeks off. Today's action by the Republican leadership is a failure of their responsibility to lead, and I urge them to reconsider and agree to remain here and commit to working together in a bipartisan way to address the urgent issues facing our country. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Americans continue to look for work, put food on the table, and ensure their children have proper school supplies as fall comes into full swing. Yet the House is set to leave Washington today with many items on its to-do list. While Congress finishes up the work to pass a budget to fund the federal government, catastrophic cuts loom on the horizon, set to hit in January of 2013. Leaving these cuts unresolved is unconscionable. Not only is this the wrong message to send to the American people, it's simply not the right thing to do. Our all-volunteer force is at war, and these cuts threaten our national security. Furthermore, they threaten over 200,000 jobs in Virginia. 9 days remain before the new fiscal year begins. Congress should do the right thing and stay in Washington instead of ignoring the reality and delaying tough decisions. It's time to put governing over politics. Let's stay in Washington and finish the job that we were elected and expected to do. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Fired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I request permission to address the House for 1 minute and answer the senators.
Without objection, the gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
The Stop the War on Coal Act is up today. It is the coal industry which is waging war on our mountains by leveling them, war on our lungs by burning dirty fuel, war on healthy children by being the single largest source of mercury exposure, war on our rivers and streams by filling them with toxic waste, war on groundwater through poisonous ash fills, war on its workers through conditions which continue to kill, war on families by breaking unions and relentlessly reducing jobs, war on our national debt by taking billions of subsidies, and now war on ratepayers of municipal utilities across the Midwest. Time to stop this war. Peabody Coal's Prairie State Coal Plant in southern Illinois has brokered a series of shady deals that put 216 local utilities here across the Midwest on the hook for billions of dollars of energy they may never even get, while paying twice the market price, a corrupt boondoggle that will raise utility rates and saddle many publicly owned utilities with crushing debt obligations. Congress must stand up for the utility customers in these areas. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor an outstanding student athlete from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Competing at the U.S. Amateur Championship in Colorado, UTC student Stephen Fox came from behind to win the first USGA championship for the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Down by 2 holes on the par 5 17th hole, Stephen made a clutch birdie and managed to make a great par on the final hole, putting the match into sudden death after 36 grueling holes. At the first playoff hole, Stephen sunk a critical 18-foot putt to secure his victory. Stephen's victory is an inspiration to the entire UTC community and indeed to all Tennesseans. No mention of this victory is complete without mentioning the great UTC golf team, which has achieved national success at the leadership of Coach Mark Goon. Thanks to this hard work and the support of former athletic director Steve Sloan and Chancellor Roger Brown, UTC qualified for this past year's NCAA championship in Los Angeles. On behalf of all East Tennesseans, I extend my congratulations to Stephen Fox, I look forward to watching him roam the fairways at Augusta National soon. I look forward to many future successes at UTC. Go Mocs. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Our nation is facing serious economic and fiscal challenges. We have seen economic recovery over the last 4 years, but we have work to do. The fiscal policies that expire at the end of the year, known as the fiscal cliff, present a rare opportunity to set aside politics and find common ground to reduce our nation's deficit in a balanced and fiscally responsible manner. But action we take must be based on our priorities and our values. It means strengthening the middle class and building economic opportunity. It means spending cuts and new revenues. We will need to make tough choices, but there is a path forward if we are fair, if we are committed to our obligations to our seniors and our children, and if we recognize the importance of strategic investments to grow our economy now and into the future. I was proud to be one of just 38 members to support a bipartisan proposal by Representatives Cooper and LaTourette, which included tax reform and spending cuts to reduce the nation's deficit. Let's move our country forward by taking responsible, meaningful, and timely action.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's time for Americans to know the truth about the abuse of their hard-earned taxpayer dollars, especially at a time when the President's calling for tax increases. The issue I'm talking about is IRS action that puts billions of taxpayer dollars at risk. Currently, the IRS allows individuals without a Social Security number to get cash benefits, like the $1,000 refundable child tax credit, which is costing American taxpayers billions of dollars. By obtaining an individual taxpayer identification number, or ITIN. A recent IG report revealed a shocking scandal within the IRS that encouraged employees to fast-track ITIN approval without regard to preventing fraud. The ITIN has become a ticket to get cash from Uncle Sam, and this is wrong. I'm introducing the ITIN Reform Act to hold the IRS feet to the fire to better protect the American taxpayer, and I urge all my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, on August 3rd, 1962, a life-changing decision was made by Dr. Denton Cooley in the founding of the Texas Heart Institute. As I listened to the words said this morning, he chose wisdom over ignorance with respect to diagnosing cardiovascular disease, the most devastating kill of Americans, killing a life every 33 seconds, 2,600 lives each day, and nearly 1 million lives each year. Dr. Cooley was honored this past week with tributes from President George Bush and President William Jefferson Clinton, joined by his wife and children and extended family. Over the years, he has been able to help men and women and children. He has done a magnificent job with respect to the amount of surgeries that have been performed. He performed more than 118,000 open heart operations, 258,000 cardiac catheterizations, and 1,270 heart transplants. The Texas Heart Institute, along with St. Luke's Hospital, continues to serve the world and continues to do research to improve the lives of those who suffer from heart disease. Dr. James Willerson is the new CEO. His demeanor and temperament, his research abilities, his leadership has taken this great institution to the 21st century. But what a great honor to be with those who honor Dr. Denton Cooley for his wisdom and his ability to challenge medical profession, science, to be able to save lives. Today, children live, families are reunited, and we are stronger in our health because of the existence of the Texas Heart Institute. It is my privilege to congratulate them for 50 years of saving lives. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Gentlemen seek unanimous consent? Yes. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the more than 83,000 Americans still listed as missing in action or prisoners of war. Today is National POW MIA Recognition Day. I'd like to bring to the attention of my House colleagues the efforts made by the Joint POW MIA Accounting Command to recover and return home to their families our unaccounted for service members. Also, let us recognize groups such as Rolling Thunder, the Vietnam Veterans of America, the American Ex-Prisoners of War, the National League of POW MIA Families, and numerous others who ensure those who remain missing are never forgotten and that our nation remembers their sacrifice. This includes Army Private First Class Ethiel Watley of Escambia County, Florida, who was last seen on the 12th of July of 1950 in Korea and who is remembered every day of the year by his brother Nat. We salute our POWs and MIAs who have given to this nation more than we can ever repay. The United States will not rest until each is home and has received the proper burial on American soil they deserve. Please offer a prayer for those who remain on the battlefields of the past and of the present, and let us pledge that not one is left behind. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this is Constitution Week, when we celebrate our fundamental rights as Americans. Today, one of the most cherished rights, the right to vote, is under serious attack. Recent efforts to suppress voter participation are designed to silence the voice of American voters, especially seniors, people of color, the poor, and young adults. In Florida, new restrictions on voter registration led the League of Women Voters to suspend their efforts until the law was halted by the court. Republican legislatures have passed strict voter requirements, although Pennsylvania could not provide even one example of voter fraud. Even elderly veterans who risked their lives for our country may be turned away from the polls because they lack the proper IDs. 5 million Americans could be disenfranchised. Anyone who values our Constitution should encourage voting, not erect barriers based on false claims of voter fraud. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 3409.
Objection, so ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 780 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 3409. Will the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Yoder, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 3409, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to limit the authority of the Secretary of the Interior to issue regulations before December 31st, 2013, under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977.
We in the Committee of the Whole rose on Thursday, September 20th, 2012. Amendment number 7, printed in House Report 112-680, offered by the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Harris, had been disposed of. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 8, printed in House Report 112-680. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in House Report number 112-680, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 788, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
I thank the chairman very much. Mr. Chairman, this is an amendment that I believe that common sense would allow us to work together and pass, because this amendment would simply maintain the current deadline that existed under the previous administration of 90 days under the Clean Water Act by striking Section 503 of the bill, which artificially limits agency comment periods on water quality permits to 30 days with no possibility of extension. This existed under President Bush's administration. Why then would my friends on the other side of the aisle not join with me to say, let's have regular order? Let's ensure that we give everyone the reasonable opportunity for a response on their quality of life. On the surface, the intent of H.R. 3409 appears to be to prevent the Interior Department from revising a Bush administration midnight regulation that significantly weakened protections on the destructive practice of mountaintop removal mining. Well, let me remind you, they did not alter the comment period. Mountaintop removal mining, as many of us know, is a very challenging, environmentally difficult process. For many, they say it creates jobs. What we are trying to do is to ensure that there is a balance between that industry and as well the fairness of allowing those to be able to comment. As it's presently drafted, this bill would reach, in fact, it would make it much more difficult, if you will, to deal with the question of rulemaking. The people in the state of Texas, the city of Houston, appreciate the ability to drink cool, fresh water. So does everyone else. And the idea of not being able to comment on the impact of this particular process is challenging. And so I ask my colleagues to consider the importance of coming together and extending or going back to the 90-day comment period to balance, if you will, the time frame and to ensure that all are heard on any aspects that would impact the environment of this particular procedure. With that, I reserve my time.
Gentlelady from Texas reserves. For purposes, the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I object to the amendment and I reserve my time.
Gentleman claims time in opposition?
Yes.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
How much time do I have?
Gentlelady from Texas has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Okay. I'll yield the gentleman 1 minute. I'm yielding to the gentleman from Florida for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of the gentlelady's amendment to yet another bill that will never become law, another bill that feeds into the biggest problem we have here. The 112th Congress has actually set a sad new low for our democracy. We all know that President Harry Truman famously dubbed the 80th Congress in 1948 as the Do-Nothing Congress. Yet the Do-Nothing Congress of 1948 has nothing on this one. That Congress passed over 900 laws, while the 112th Congress has passed just over 100. Among the countless laws blocked by the Republican majority is the American Jobs Act, which economists say would create over 2.5 million jobs. It's a sad day when the main drag on America's economy is the House of Representatives. You know, most Americans actually have to earn their vacation days, Mr. Chairman. The only thing the Republican Congress has earned are abysmal approval ratings. The 112th Congress puts Harry Truman's Do-Nothing Congress to shame, and at a time when our economy should come first, that, Mr. Chairman, is shameful. I rise in strong support of the gentlelady's amendment to a bill that prevents us from actually accomplishing the real work the American people expect from us, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Okay. I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I thank the gentleman very much. Mr. Speaker, let me just clarify what is happening with this legislation. It eliminates the EPA's authority to apply minimum federal water quality standards sufficient to protect human and aquatic life, and it is weaker than state standards in many places. It strips the EPA's authority to object to state discharge permits that fail to meet Clean Water Act requirements. Now, this is not about creating jobs, Mr. Speaker. And I ask on the names of our children, yet unborn, to be able to have the quality of life and quality of water and quality of air that the requirements that they are trying to eliminate in this bill, the proponent of this bill, to the extent that they will narrow the comment period to 30 days rather than 90 days. Why is that not a simple request that my good friend could not say, Congresswoman, we support the amendment? I hope that's what he will say. Because the difficulty that I have is I'd rather, Mr. Speaker, be doing Medicare, tax breaks, jobs, urgent priorities that are needed. I just ask a little bit of consideration on recognizing that the nation is better when we have provided a quality of life for all Americans. Who are we to speak of the needs of people who have coal in their region? But what we have asked is that we put the four parameters of common sense and reasonableness. My amendment is that it expands back to its regular order, the existing comment period, Mr. Speaker, to 90 days. It strikes the provision in this bill that limits it to 30 days. I ask my colleagues to support the Jackson-Lee amendment that speaks to the health and good quality of life for all Americans and America's children. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I rise in opposition to the gentlelady's amendment because it strikes an important provision in the bill that streamlines the Section 404 permit process, not just for coal operations, but also for billions of dollars of economic activity in this nation. One of the loudest complaints we hear in Congress is how long it takes the federal government to reach determinations on permit requests. The Army Corps of Engineers is the lead agency responsible for concluding the Section 404 permits determinations, but the Clean Water Act requires the Corps to seek consultation with other agencies like the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service. Sadly, all too often this consultation is where the needless delays occur, not because of the Corps' inaction, but because of the failure of the other agencies to provide timely information. This section, Title V, simply sets a more reasonable time frame for federal agencies to get information to the Corps so a permit decision can be made in a timely manner. Too many of us, it is strange to see this amendment from those who purport to extol the virtues of big government. Since this amendment makes it clear they don't believe big government is competent enough to reach a decision in a reasonable amount of time. The section of Title V, the language which is already passed in the House in a resounding bipartisan majority, will streamline the time-consuming permit application process and ensure that $220 billion of annual economic activity associated with Section 404 activities does not grind to a halt. Time is money, and this is about jobs. And the slower the time it takes to get these permits done, it holds up economic activity and the creation of jobs all across America in all sectors. I urge all members to oppose the Jackson-Lee amendment.
The questions on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
What? I asked for the Mr. Chairman, I call for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings offered by the gentlelady from Texas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in House Report 112-680. For purposes, the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9. In House Report number 112-680. Offered by Mr. McKinley of West Virginia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 788, the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment will prohibit the EPA from retroactively invalidating permits after they've been issued. On January 13, 2011, the EPA took an unprecedented action by retroactively revoking a lawfully issued Section 404 permit for the Spruce No. 1 mine, surface mine in Logan County, West Virginia. This permit had been issued 4 years earlier after an extensive 10-year environmental review, including 1,600-page environmental impact statement in which the EPA fully participated and agreed to all the terms and conditions included in the authorized permit. But this amendment is intended to address far more than coal mines. If the EPA can retroactively revoke a water permit for this industry, they could do the same to any other manufacturer, refinery, municipality, farm, or other government agency. Imagine an entrepreneur contemplating making an investment requiring an EPA permit, but then stopping once they learn that the EPA could first grant the permit, allow the business to proceed, and then invalidating the permit, crushing the investment. Or imagine a lending institution contemplating whether or not to loan money to someone subject to an EPA regulation. Should any of us be critical of them for being reluctant once they too become aware that their loan could go into default once the EPA retroactively revokes the permit on which the loan was granted? All of us in Congress should be concerned about the chilling effect these actions by the EPA have had and will have if they continue this threat to the creation of jobs by exceeding their statutory authority. At a time when our country is facing economic uncertainty and our families are struggling to make ends meet, I'm appalled by this continued assault on American businesses and families that the EPA has taken. Our job creators need a consistent and predictable regulatory program that will protect jobs we have, create new ones, so that we need an environmentally responsible manner. Remember, this amendment is not just for coal mining, but rather it addresses virtually every business in America which requires certainty in their regulatory environment. I urge your support, and I reserve the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman from West Virginia reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the time in opposition to Mr. McKinley's amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself such time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this amendment would take away the EPA's authority under the Clean Water Act to retroactively deny permits to fill streams and wetlands in order to protect drinking water supplies, recreational waters, and fish and wildlife habitat. Now, EPA has used this authority to veto permits after they were issued responsibly only 3 times in 10 years. I should say 3 times in 40 years. All of these were extremely rare cases, and these vetoes were necessary to protect critical water resources. In 1981, EPA revoked a permit for a solid waste landfill because it was leaking toxics into Biscayne Bay. In 1989, after objecting to a permit before it was issued, it overturned a permit to destroy 1,200 acres of floodplain wetlands in Georgia. And in 2010, which Mr. McKinley mentions, EPA denied a permit for one of the largest mountaintop removal mines in Appalachia that would have buried more than 6 miles of West Virginia streams and polluted downstream waters with mining waste, causing permanent damage to ecosystems and streams. The veto was not a surprise, and I stress that. EPA consistently expressed its concerns about water quality impacts of this mine beginning from 2002 through 2006 when the Corps issued the permit. Now, let me stress that this was an extremely rare action taken by EPA, and the first time it used the Clean Water Act to overturn an approved mining permit. But surface mining in the steep slopes of Appalachia has disrupted the biological integrity of an area about the size of Delaware, buried approximately 2,000 miles of streams with mining waste and contaminated downstream areas with toxic elements. And people have been drinking the byproducts of coal waste from mountaintop removal for more than 2 decades. Rather than clean and clear water running out of their faucets, the people of Appalachia are left with orange or black liquid instead. And this is not just about the environment, Mr. Speaker, it's about public health. The health problems caused by exposure to these chemicals and heavy metals include cancer, organ failure, and learning disabilities. Not only that, but there are multiple cases of children suffering from asthma, headaches, nausea, and other symptoms likely due to toxic contamination from coal dust. This is an environmental justice issue. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle will claim EPA is killing jobs, and I disagree with Mr. McKinley. What EPA is doing is protecting the people of Appalachia from exposure to toxic chemicals that are harming them. Now, to put this in perspective, each year the Army Corps of Engineers processes about 60,000 permits to fill waters and grants 97% of them. Over 40 years, the EPA has vetoed only 3 of these permits retroactively. On the very rare occasion one of these permits threatens to permanently destroy our nation's critical water resources, the EPA should have the authority to stop it. This is authority that the EPA has used very rarely, and there is no evidence that the EPA has abused this authority. This amendment is completely unnecessary. I urge members to oppose it and to protect EPA's authority to safeguard our waters and our drinking water sources, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I ask how much time remains.
Both gentlemen have 2 minutes remaining.
I'm sorry?
Both gentlemen have 2 minutes remaining.
2 minutes remaining. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to give the congressman from Ohio 1 minute, please.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of the amendment. I chair the committee. We had the hearings on this issue, and let's get straight what this issue is. His amendment stops a revocation of a permit that's issued after it's been issued. And what the gentleman just referred to is a permit during the application process. The law allows the EPA to veto a permit during the process, but after it's been approved, this amendment takes care of not being able to revoke it years later in the instance that it was done. And keep in mind, the revocation that occurred was not because they were in violation of the permit. It was nothing but political theater. There was no violation of the permit. The state of West Virginia EPA stated that, and the Army Corps of Engineers said there was no violation of the permit. This is a revocation that sets a bad, dangerous precedent to our economic growth in this country. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from West Virginia reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, you know, I want to point out that in addition to this being a terrible amendment, it's also an amendment that's going nowhere, and it really frustrates me that on the last day of the session before the election, this do-nothing Congress continues to bring up bills that are going nowhere and they know are going nowhere. For 2 years, the House Republicans have picked millionaires over Medicare and the middle class. Now they plan to leave town today without entering into law any responsible deficit reduction, any middle-class tax cuts, the American Jobs Act, the Have No Jobs bill, the Farm Bill they have neglected, the Violence Against Women Act. These are all urgent priorities that we should be working on right now, rather than trying to pass amendments or bills that are going nowhere. The American people can't afford a do-nothing Republican Congress that refuses to act on issues critical to middle-class families, to small businesses, to farmers, and to women. And I urge the Republican leadership to just stay in town and complete our work. Don't waste our time on bills like this that are going nowhere. The Senate's never going to take this up. Now, here are a few of the things that the do-nothing Republican Congress has found time to do. Voted to end Medicare as we know it and increased costs on seniors by $6,400. Republicans chose millionaires over the middle class, giving more tax breaks to the wealthiest. Republicans voted for corporations that ship jobs overseas over passing the American Jobs Act, and Republicans voted to restrict women's access to health services. It is amazing to me that we sit here hour after hour on the last day, because they refuse to continue to work, and talk about bills that are going nowhere, when all these other major priorities need to be addressed. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
The right to close.
The gentleman from New Jersey has the right to close.
Is he closed? Is he finished?
Reserve your time.
Reserve time.
Reserve your time.
I reserve the right to close. I'm reserving my time.
Reserve your time.
The gentleman from New Jersey has 30 seconds remaining. The gentleman from West Virginia has 1 1/4. The gentleman from New Jersey has the right to close.
The right to close. So he can close. You're going to have to finish.
I'm going to close. So if you're not going to use your 30 seconds?
The gentleman from New Jersey has the right to close.
He has the right to close.
He has the right to close? Okay. I thought I was as a sponsor. I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, briefly, let me just underscore here how people try to distract attention away from with the argument. We've heard all these other arguments. We've talked about, I've heard the opponents talk about this is the first time or third time or whatever that is. Let's go back to what the courts have said. Perhaps we need to have on the other side a little bit more education, because the federal courts have already struck down that initial reading. They said, and shame on you for not having read all of this. It's the federal court said the EPA's interpretation of the Act is not reasonable. Neither the statute nor the memorandum of agreement between the EPA and the Corps makes any provision for a post-permit veto, and this agency was completely unable to articulate what the practical consequences of its actions would be. In addition, the court went on to say that the Clean Air Act does not give the EPA the power to render a permit invalid once it has been issued by the Corps. We ought to put this to rest, codify it, and move on. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask for a recorded vote. Thank you.
The gentleman is back. The gentleman's request is not timely. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very much aware that the EPA's veto was challenged by the mining company, and the EPA has appealed this ruling, and I'm hoping that the Court of Appeals will see the light and understand that the EPA should be able to protect the health of the people of Appalachia. Again, this amendment is completely unnecessary and is part of a process where this Republican House does absolutely nothing but waste our time. We shouldn't be leaving today. We should be staying and doing our work. I yield back.
The gentleman from New Jersey yields back. All time having yielded back, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from West Virginia. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
Chairman.
The gentleman from Virginia seeks a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from West Virginia will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report 112-680. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 10, printed in House Report Number 112-680, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 788, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment is going to call for 25% of the electricity in the United States being generated by renewables by the year 2035. The United States, excluding hydro, is already up to 7 or 8% of all of our electricity generated by renewables here in 2012. So 23 years from now, the goal would be to reach 25%. Now, why do I feel compelled to bring this amendment out here? Well, while the Republicans say that there's a war on coal, so far, in this first year and 9 months that they have controlled the United States Congress, they have declared war on solar. They have declared war on wind. They have declared war on all renewables. That's why I bring this amendment down here to the House floor. They are going to kill the production tax credit for wind energy that is going to send the wind industry off a cliff next year. Already, 2,367 jobs have been lost in the wind industry because of Republican action. 40,000 jobs will be lost next year because of Republican action. They are out to deliberately kill these jobs. How many will be lost? 3,000 to 4,000 jobs in Pennsylvania will be lost. 4,000 to 5,000 jobs in Colorado will be lost. 5,000 to 6,000 wind jobs will be lost in Ohio. 6,000 to 7,000 wind jobs will be lost in Iowa if the Republican policy is allowed to be put on the books. They have declared war on wind. They have declared war on solar, on geothermal, on biomass. Declared war. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what my amendment does is say, let's have a plan for everything else, because it's not part of the Republican plan. And so, by the year 2035, 25% of all electricity in our country must come from renewables. Now, how do we know this is possible? There were 12,000 new megawatts of wind installed in the United States this year. 3,200 new megawatts of solar installed in the United States this year. So, geothermal, biomass, it's all growing. What's their goal? Kill it. Kill it. That's their problem. Natural gas is rising. It hurts the coal industry. It's the marketplace. Wind and solar are growing. Geothermal and biomass are growing. They don't want a level playing field. They want to pick winners and losers. They want to pick favorites. That's what it's all about. So far, in their control of the Congress in just a year and 9 months, they have voted to slash research and development for wind and solar. They have voted to end loan guarantees for wind and solar. They have voted to kill the transmission wires to carry wind and solar to our homes and our offices. The Republicans are so opposed to Americans having access to clean energy that even when it is built, they don't even want to have the transmission lines to get it to American homes. It's a war on solar and wind. My amendment ensures that there's a pathway to the future for the most abundant American energy source, wind and solar, geothermal and biomass. It's all here in America. At this point, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
I rise to claim time in opposition, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
From Massachusetts has 1 1/4 remaining.
Do I have the right to close? I reserve my time.
From Kentucky has the right to close.
If I may inquire from the chairman, is the majority saying that there is only 1 speaker remaining on their side?
Yes.
Then I will yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 1/4 minutes.
And not only is it the most abundant source of energy in the United States, wind and solar, when we capture it. Einstein won his Nobel Prize in 1921. He only won 1 Nobel Prize, and that's on how to capture the power of the sun. And now we're on the cusp of doing this successfully as the price per kilowatt hour drops and drops. And then it's all American. And who is now looming over our shoulder? Even though we invented these technologies, even though we're producing these technologies, are the Chinese, the Indians, and others who will pounce on this global opportunity to create the jobs here in the United States, to export this technology around the world, even as we deploy the technology here in our country that backs out the energy sources from around the rest of the world. This is what they fear. They fear the innovation. They fear the change. They fear our ability to capture wind and solar, to be able to power the vehicles which we drive in our country, to be able to send up a cleaner source of energy up into the sky that does not pollute. That's what this battle's all about. And we do not want special advantage. All we want is a level playing field. The Republicans continue this war against wind and solar. Vote aye for the Markey Amendment, 25% renewable electricity by the year 2035.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
We haven't declared war on wind or solar or anything else. We simply don't believe that when you have a $16 trillion federal debt, that the federal government should use taxpayers' money to serve as venture capital for risky ventures like Solyndra. They received $538 million and now is bankrupt. If this technology is so good, let the free market develop it. It does not need taxpayer support. And yet, on the other hand, this administration has adopted policies that you can't even build a new coal-fired plant in America because there's no technology available to meet the new emission standards of the Obama EPA. And on this particular amendment, on page 7 of the amendment, it says that by the year 2035 that 50% of the electricity would have to be produced from renewables. The gentleman in his comments said 25%, but this amendment says 50. Well, I'm just reading from page 7. But anyway, this amendment simply creates a national renewable electricity standard. We've seen it before. It was in the Waxman-Markey cap-and-trade bill in the last Congress, which was rejected by the Congress. And this amendment does nothing more than mandate, determines for the American people where their electricity will come from, and that they are going to be paying more for it. So I urge people to vote against the Markey Amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back. All time having expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
On that, I request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote's been requested pursuant to clause. In further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 11, printed in House Report 112-680. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 11, printed in House Report Number 112-680, offered by Mr. DeFazio of Oregon.
Pursuant to House Resolution 788, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon.
I thank the Chair. Well, today the Do-Nothing Congress will slink out of town. It's going to be the earliest adjournment in an election year since 1960. But, you know, I guess the nation has no problems and there's no work undone, so it's just time to go home and campaign. It's pretty extraordinary. We've enacted one quarter the number of bills into law of Harry Truman's Do-Nothing Congress, 1947-48. So I guess this is the Do-Nothinger Congress. So here we are again today. We're going to consider today, the only work today will be 4 bills that have previously passed the House. Someone hasn't read their civics textbooks. If you pass a bill in the House and send it to the Senate, it's there. They'll consider it, they won't consider it. If you pass it again and send it again, doesn't make any difference. In fact, it's somewhat repetitive and wasteful of everybody's time when we could be doing postal reform to assure the future of the post office. We could be doing the Farm Bill. There are a lot of people suffering a horrible drought. We could be dealing with the sequestration, which there's concern on both sides of the aisle on that. But we're not. We're considering 4 bills previously passed and 1 new one. Well, I have a reasonable amendment to an unreasonable bill, which is now before us, which is the one new bill before us. And my amendment would ask that within 6 months, that's not very long, the Department of Transportation and the EPA submit a report to Congress on fugitive coal dust. Now, I've seen some couple of extraordinary letters have been sent out saying, my God, this will stop projects and exports that are going forward, undue delay. I'm not aware of anything that would be delayed by this. It says the study will be done. It doesn't delay any ongoing applications or projects at all. But what it would do is potentially avert a tremendous amount of litigation down the road if we find that fugitive coal dust is not a problem, which the coal industry says, then that would relieve a lot of people in gateway ports and large cities in the West where coal dust is being proposed to transit through those cities, including cities in my district. People are very concerned about this. They want to know, is it a problem? How far from the loading point does fugitive coal dust get emitted from the car? Are there ways to deal with the fugitive coal dust? Does the surfactant work? Is that a solution? Should the cars be covered? Is that a solution? What are the problems? What are the problems at its destination in terms of whether or not there would be coal dust at the port destination? If the coal is stored outside, how is it transported onto the ship, et cetera, et cetera. So if we had these answers, we could talk about the safe and clean transport and allay a lot of concerns that are ultimately going to lead to a lot of litigation unless we know. Now, the industry says, oh, it's been studied. Well, no, it hasn't. And in fact, one railroad has pursued action against the coal industry because fugitive coal dust has caused safety problems on the railroad. It gets into the ballast. It blocks the ballast from draining. The ballast destabilizes. The tracks destabilize, and trains can derail. Now, that seems to me like a problem that should be dealt with. And there may be some very, very simple ways to deal with it. Some say surfactants. Some say covered cars. There are other potential solutions out there. Wouldn't it be good to know? Wouldn't it be good to know? That's all I'm saying. A 6-month study and a report to Congress won't delay anything at all. It just will give us some knowledge, and I would hope that we legislate around here with a little bit of knowledge and not just off the cuff. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oregon reserves. For purposes of the gentleman from Kentucky, seek recognition.
I rise to claim time in opposition, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes. The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Does that mean there's only one speaker on their side?
That's correct.
Okay. How much time do I have remaining?
The gentleman from Oregon has 1 minute remaining.
Okay. Well, again, we will hear apocryphal denouncements from the other side of the aisle. My God, this will cost millions of jobs and billions of dollars and stymie our exports. No, it's a study. It's a study that would take 6 months. It's a study that, if it agrees with the industry's conclusions, would assure the American public that there won't be problems with these trains transiting through their hometowns. It's something we should know. It's something the government should look at. Apparently there's some proprietary studies that we aren't allowed to see that say there's no problem. Well, if that's true, then the railroads and the industry should let the American public see those proprietary studies. Really, not too many people are willing to take someone at their word when it comes to an issue of public health. So it's a very simple amendment. It won't delay anything. It'll take 6 months. It'll cost very little, and it will give us the information and knowledge we need to figure out how to safely transport coal. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oregon yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
While we have great respect for our friends on the other side of the aisle, I think we all recognize that we do have basic differences in our philosophy about the way energy is produced in America. It's quite clear that many people on the other side of the aisle are very much opposed to coal. Not only do they not want us to burn coal in America, they don't want us to export coal to other countries, even though it would help our trade deficit and would preserve jobs in the coal industry. This particular amendment on fugitive dust is really unnecessary because fugitive dust from the transport of coal is already regulated at the federal and state level under the Clean Air Act, as well as state fugitive dust laws and regulations. EPA already is required to study the environmental and health impacts from particulate matter from all sources, including fugitive sources, and of all compositions, including coal dust. And the most recent summary of that science was published by EPA in 2009 and supplemented in 2010. In fact, this week the Army Corps of Engineers also announced that it will conduct an environmental assessment of the proposed coal terminal in the sponsor's district. So I would say that we already have adequate protection. There's no need for this amendment, although I'm sure it's offered with the very best of intentions. And so I would urge our members to oppose this amendment and would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back. All time having expired, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have
On
it,
that,
and the
Mr.
amendment is
Chairman,
not
I
agreed
ask a
to.
recorded vote.
Gentleman from Oregon seeks a recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon will be postponed. For what purpose? It is now in order to consider amendment number 12, printed in House Report 112-680. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise as the designee of the gentleman from North Dakota to offer amendment number 12, made in order by the rule providing for consideration of H.R. 3409.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in House Report number 112-680, offered by Mr. Flake of Arizona.
Pursuant to House Resolution 788, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
I thank the Chair, and I'll immediately yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Dakota.
The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and joining me in this amendment. I rise to support our amendment to ensure states continue to have control over regional haze regulations. When Congress first established EPA's Regional Haze Program, it acknowledged that regional haze and visibility regulation has to do purely with aesthetic value and not public health. For that very reason, Congress emphasized that the states, not EPA, should be the decision makers when it comes to regulations of regional haze. Instead of empowering states to do what's best for their citizens, the Obama administration has again imposed another costly one-size-fits-all regulation for the producers of energy, who are the most critical job creators in my state and across the country. Our amendment will limit EPA's availability to override states' management of regional haze, and it empowers states to implement their own regional haze management plans, the plans that best fit their individual needs. It's time to stop the war on coal, and I urge my colleagues to support our amendment on the underlying bill. I yield back.
The gentleman from North Dakota yields back. The gentleman from Arizona reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek to control the time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman's